How are you students? I hope you're good. I'm good myself. So in today's lesson, we'll be focusing on answering this question paper, right? We'll be focusing on application, how to approach your section A. So today we'll be doing section A only. It's lower order questions. Then on our next lesson, we'll be focusing on high order questions. So let's start before we waste any time. So let's go to 1.1.1. Already you know the rules. Right? It's very important for you to read the statement before you go to the questions. Let's go to 1.1.1. Which of the following is a mechanical defense mechanism that plants use? Remember, we have mechanical, right, which is physical defense, and chemical defense. Chemical defense is chemicals, right? Now let's go to the options and see which option best suits the mechanical defense mechanism. Okay, now let's go to option A. Production of sweet nectar in flowers. Sweet nectar in flowers is not a mechanical defense, right? As you can see. Let's go to B. Secretion of chemicals to make leaves taste better to herbivores. Definitely it's not this one. Secretion of chemicals is not related to chemicals. Mechanical defense is not related to chemicals. Let's go to C. Thorns on stems and leaves. So this one sounds about right. So the answer is C. It becomes thorns on stems and leaves. So that's how plants protects protect themselves mechanically, right? So now let's go to D, right? Because we have to go through the last option. Increased secretion of abscisic acid causes leaves and fruits to fall off the plant. Obviously, this we know that this is a function of what? Abscisic acid. It has nothing to do with mechanical defense. Does that make sense? Now let's go to 1.1.2. The following statement describe some parts of a human sperm cell. Human sperm cell. It's very important for you to understand that. Now let's go to the list here, right? Start with Roman figure 1. Many mitochondria that provide energy for the movement. Roman figure 2, a tail that moves in a whip-like motion. Roman figure 3, a chromosome that contains enzymes to digest the jelly layer of the ovum. Then Roman figure 4, the nucleus contains 23 chromosomes. Now let's go to the questions. Which combination of statements are structural adaptations that ensure that sperm cells can move towards an ovum? So they're looking for structural adaptations with regards to locomotion or movement, right? So it's locomotion rather, right? Excuse my mistake there, or movement. So now let's check, right? Many mitochondria that provide energy for movement, definitely, right? The sperm needs energy so that it can move towards the egg cell or towards the ovum. Let's go to Roman figure 2. A tail that moves in a whip-like motion. Obviously, the tail acts as a propeller because it propels the sperm to move towards the ovum. Now let's go to Roman figure 3. A chromosome that contains enzymes to digest the jelly layer of the ovum. The acrosome has nothing to do with movement. So the acrosome has nothing to do with that. Now let's go to Roman figure 4. The nucleus contains 23 chromosomes. Even this one has nothing to do with movement, right? Has nothing to do with movement. So our answer is Roman figure 1 and Roman figure 2. Now let's see. So our answer is B here. It's B. It's very important for you to understand the question, right? The question spoke about movement. And the acrosome, right? Remember, it's an enzyme that helps in the digestion of the jelly layer of the ovum. And Roman figure 4 speaks about the nucleus, right? And we know that the nucleus only contains genetic material, which are your 23 chromosomes. So they have nothing to do with the movement of the sperm. Okay. Now let's go to 1.1.3. Which of the following events takes place during oogenesis? Oogenesis, remember, oogenesis is gametogenesis taking place in females, right? I hope that makes a lot of sense. Now let's go to the options here. A, 3 daughter cells from meiosis will degenerate. Okay, so let's leave this one and look at other options, right? So this one is a possible answer, but we're not saying it's an answer yet because we have to view or go through other options before choosing an option. Now let's go to B. The diploid germinal epithelium cells lining the seminiferous tubules go through meiosis. Obviously, we know that seminiferous tubules are within the testes in males, right? Within the testes in males. And we're speaking about oogenesis. So we remove B. So now let's go to C. 4 daughter cells survive to form mature ovum. We know that only one daughter cell survives, not 4. 1 when it comes to oogenesis. So we're removing C. Does that make sense? Okay, now let's go to D. 1 daughter cell will mature into a sperm. This is wrong. This is completely wrong. So our answer becomes A. 3 daughter cells from meiosis will degenerate. Obviously, we know that only one survives, right? Okay, now let's go to 1.1.4 and 1.1.5. So they are based on the structure. Firstly, before we go to the question, let's try to identify these structures. So let's look at structure R. So structure R is the corpus callosum. And what's the function of the corpus callosum? It divides, right, the cerebrum into the left and right hemisphere. So it's this bone structure that divides the cerebrum. Now let's look at S. Our S becomes what? The cerebrum. Remember, the cerebrum is responsible for higher thought processes and is responsible for controlling voluntary movements like walking, running, and so on and so forth, right? Just to name a few functions. Now let's go to T. Our T becomes the cerebellum. What's the function of the cerebellum? The cerebellum is responsible for restoring balance and equilibrium. Moreover, it is responsible for coordination of voluntary movements. Okay, so it's very important for you to differentiate between the cerebrum and the cerebellum. So the cerebrum controls voluntary movements and the cerebellum coordinates. Coordination is working together to make sure that voluntary movements they work together, right? Okay. Now let's go to U. So our U is our medulla oblongata because it's just above the spinal cord. Remember, medulla oblongata is responsible for involuntary movements like sneezing, right? Heartbeat, breathing, and so on and so forth. Involuntary. Involuntary means that these are actions that you do not do, right? Or you are not responsible for, right? By will. Or let me just put it another way. It means that you don't do them at will. They just happen by themselves. They're automatic, right? Whereas voluntary means that you can do them at will, right? You can run at will, right? You can walk at will. So those are voluntary movements. But involuntary, they happen by themselves. They're automatic, like your heartbeat, your breathing rate, right? So that happens by itself. Now let's go to the questions. So let's go to 1.1.4. Which of the following is not a function of part S? Okay, let's go to part S. So part S is our cerebrum, right? Now let's look at the options here. A, controls voluntary muscular movements. Okay, so it's the function of the cerebrum. Okay. B, regulates heartbeat. So we know that heartbeat is an involuntary movement, and involuntary movements are controlled by the medulla oblongata. So this one is definitely not the function of what? The cerebrum. But let's continue with other options. Let's go to C. Interprets sensory impulses. Interprets sensory impulses. No, this is definitely the function of cerebrum. Let's go to D. Controls higher thought processes. Definitely, this one is also the function of the cerebrum. So our answer is B. Now let's go to 1.1.5. Which label indicates the corpus callosum? Which label indicates the corpus callosum? We already identified the corpus callosum here, so R is our answer. We don't even have to go through the options. Let me just do this. Okay, so R is our answer. So our answer is A, right? Now let's move on. Let's go to 1.1.6. Let's go to 1.1.6. Okay, a person has a tree in his garden as shown in diagram 1. He wants the tree to grow to look like the neighbor's tree as shown in diagram 2. Okay, so now let's go to the questions. How should the tree in diagram 1 be treated to achieve his goal? Obviously, the neighbor, right, is envious of, or the person is envious of their neighbor's lateral branches. And we know that the reason why a tree might have short lateral branches is because of this apical bud, right? Because of this growing tip of the stem. Why this growing tip of the stem? Because the growing tip of the stem, right, is concentrated with auxins, and auxins are responsible for apical dominance. What is apical dominance? Apical dominance is when the concentration of auxins inhibits the growth of what? Lateral branches. I hope that makes sense. But the moment you cut off this growing tip of the stem, then you start to see the branches growing wider, right? You start to see lateral branches grow wider. This is used by farmers most of the time so that it's easier for them to pick fruits from the top of the tree, right? So let's continue. Already gave you a hint. Let's go to the question. How should the tree in diagram 1 be treated to achieve his goal? Okay, let's go to option A. Treat the plant with auxins to elongate the cells. Obviously, that's not the option. You will just make the plant to have shorter lateral branches, right? Now let's go to B. Provide the stem with unilateral light. Nope, that's not the solution either, because the moment you provide the stem with the unilateral light, it'll bend towards the light. We call that phototropism. It'll, it'll just bend towards the light. Okay, let's go to C. Add abscisic acid to the soil to promote growth. Obviously, we know that's not true, right? Abscisic acid actually inhibits growth in a plant. Okay, now let's go to D. Cut the main stem to remove apical dominance. Yes, so this is our answer. You cut the main stem or the apical bud. The growing tip of the stem is called what? The apical bud. Now let's go to 1.1.7. 1.1.7 reads as follows. A person begins to climb to the top of Mount Everest. Which of the following changes will most likely occur in the person's body as they start to climb? Okay, this is an interesting question. Remember, the higher the altitude, the less oxygen you have, right? The higher the altitude, the less oxygen you have. So it means that your body will you'll start to breathe faster, right? Because you need to inhale oxygen, right? And your heart will start to beat faster. Obviously, when your breathing rate increases, also your heart starts to beat faster. These are just speculations based on the statement that they gave us, right? The higher the altitude, the less oxygen that you have in your blood, right? So the oxygen decreases the higher you go, right? Does that make sense? So the higher you climb on that mountain, the less oxygen you're exposed to. But let's go to the options. A. Oxygen in the blood increases. Definitely, oxygen in the blood does not increase, so it's wrong already because you are climbing, you're going higher, and the higher you go, you find less oxygen. Hence, most of the time, when you look at mountain climbers, right, some of them they die while climbing the mountain. Why? Because then they are not getting enough oxygen as they go higher. It becomes harder and harder to breathe. Now let's go to B. Carbon dioxide in the blood increases. Yes. Carbon dioxide, obviously, if you have less oxygen in the blood, definitely carbon dioxide will increase, causing the rate and depth of breathing to increase. So our possible answer is B, but let's go through other options. C. Oxygen in the blood decreases. Definitely, oxygen in the blood decreases, yes, causing the rate and depth of breathing to decrease. This does not make sense. This statement is contradictory in a sense that when oxygen decreases in the blood, obviously your breathing will increase because you need more oxygen in your body or in your blood, right? So, hence, I'm saying that this statement is contradictory. Now, let's go to D. Carbon dioxide in the blood decreases, okay, causing the rate and depth of breathing to increase. Then what's the point of increasing the rate and depth of breathing if carbon dioxide is decreasing? There's no point, right? So there's no point. So it's vice versa. When carbon dioxide in your blood increases, then the rate and depth of the breathing increases also, right? Those two things are directly proportional. So our answer is B. Okay. Now let's go to 1.1.8. The graph below shows the growth rate in boys and girls from birth until their late teens. Okay, now let's go to the question. Which of the following statement is true? Is a correct conclusion rather from the graph. Okay, A, boys always have a higher growth rate than girls. Let's look at our graph and check whether that's true. Okay, we can see it's not true, right? You can see that at this age, right, girls, they are growing faster than boys at this age, right? Between 10 years and 12 years old, right? So definitely option A is not true. Let's go to B. Boys stop growing at a younger age than girls. They stop growing at a younger age. No, that's not true. They don't stop. Actually, they continue to grow. As you can see the graph here, it's after the age of 6 or after the age of 12, boys, they grow faster, right? They grow even more as compared to girls. Okay. So it's not true. So B is not true. Let's go to C. Girls have a higher growth rate than boys between the ages of 4 and 6. Okay. Higher growth rate rather. Okay. 4 to 6. We can see that actually boys have a higher growth rate between the ages of what? 4 to 6. So that's not true. So C is not true. Now let's go to D. D. Girls have a higher growth rate than boys between the ages of 10 and 13. That's true, right? Based on our graph, we can see that girls have higher growth rate between the ages of 12 and 13 here. So this is the area we're speaking about, right? So our answer is what? Let me do this. Our answer is D. Yeah. As that makes sense. Between the ages of 10 to 13. So you can see here from 10 to 13. Now let's go to our biological terms. Biological terms. I just paused them. Okay. Let's go to 1.2.1. A chemical substance. This is the thing about biological terms. You need to be able to recognize a biological term just by reading the first statement. Right? These are keywords. For the fact that they're saying here a chemical substance that causes communication. So we're speaking about a chemical substance. Right? What's the function of that chemical substance? It causes the communication between the end of one neuron and the start of the next neuron. So the answer here is neurotransmitters, right? Or neurotransmitter. So that's the chemical that's between the neurons, right? One end of one neuron and the start of the next neuron, right? It's within the space that's in between the two neurons. What do we call that space? We call that space a synapse, right? Okay. So the answer here is neurotransmitter. Now let's go to 1.2.2. the hormone that stimulates the production of milk in human females. So the moment they speak about the production of milk, so this is the keyword. We're speaking about prolactin, right? Prolactin. This is the keyword. And now let's go to 1.2.3. A bony structure that encloses and protects the brain. What's that bony structure? Obviously, the brain is protected by the cranium. So that's the bony structure we're speaking about. Then after the cranium is protected by three membranes called what? Meninges. But whenever they're speaking about a bony structure that encloses the brain, they're speaking about the cranium. Okay, now let's go to 1.2.4. Fluid that protects the human embryo against mechanical injuries, right? So against the mechanical injuries, fluid, right, that protects the human embryo against mechanical injuries. So they're telling you the function of this fluid, and the only fluid that performs this function is called what? The amniotic fluid. Okay, that's the answer here. Let's go to 1.2.5. A phenomenon where an increase in the secretion of one hormone inhibits the secretion of another, right? So obviously we know that this is feedback mechanism, right? Where there's an increase, right? One hormone increases and another hormone decreases. So when you see that, right, um, that increase and decrease in hormones, we call that the feedback mechanism. Okay. Or even if they can say that it's an interaction between two hormones. And when the moment they say it's an interaction between two hormones, then they're speaking about what? Feedback mechanism. Now let's go to 1.3. So 1.3, let's go to 1.3.1. The site where fertilization takes place. Okay, fertilization we know obviously takes place within the fallopian tubes, not the uterus. The uterus is the site of implantation. Now let's go to 1.3.2, a condition which results in the lens becoming cloudy. It's not definitely not astigmatism, but our answer is cataracts. So what's the difference between astigmatism and cataracts? So astigmatism, right, it's where your cornea or your lens becomes uneven, right, causing the light to be refracted in multiple directions, right, on the retina. Okay. Now let's go to 1.3.3. Pupillary mechanism responds when the stimulus is a bright light. So when the stimulus is a bright light, we know that it can be ciliary muscles, right? It can be. Ciliary muscles are involved in accommodation. So our answer becomes what? None. Right? It becomes none. Because our radial muscles, when the eye is exposed to bright light, our radial muscles, they do what? They relax. They don't contract. Right? They relax. So our sacral muscles, they contract. Radial muscles, they relax. Right? Causing the pupil to do what? To constrict. That's allowing less light to come into the eye or to come through the eye. Does that make sense? So our answer here is none. None of the two. Right? Now let's go to 1.4. The diagram below shows how the blood of a human embryo flows close to the mother's blood during pregnancy. So as we can see here, this is the mother's blood, right? And then this is the embryo's blood, right? So here, obviously, would assume that this is the placenta. Remember, the embryo is connected to the mother through the placenta. Then from the placenta, right, to the embryo, we have the umbilical cord, right? The umbilical cord. So within the umbilical cord, we have two umbilical arteries and one umbilical vein. But let's continue. Let's see the questions. 1.4.1. Give the name of the structure that contains blood vessel B and vessel C, right? Blood vessel B and vessel C. So our answer here is the umbilical cord, right? So let's go to 1.4.2. 1.4.2 reads as follows. List two important substances that are transported by vessel B, right? Now let's look at vessel B. Let me just remove it so that I see it clearly. Yeah. So vessel B, right? So what is vessel B? Vessel B can become our umbilical vein because we have one umbilical vein and two umbilical arteries. Because it's one here, so it's one umbilical vein. So umbilical vein transports what? It transports oxygen, right? And also transports nutrients. So oxygen and nutrients. Does that make sense? I hope that makes a lot of sense. But before, let's just look at the arrows here. Let's look at the arrows, right? Okay, you can see that these two veins, C is transporting, right, from the the embryo to the mother or to the placenta, because we can see here the arrows, right? Then this one vein is transporting from the mother to the embryo. So we can look at so obviously I just wanted to confirm my answers through looking at the arrows here. Okay. Now let's go to other the other question. 1.4.3. One of the functions of part A is to bring the mother's and the embryo's blood close together. Identify part A. So part A becomes what? The placenta. So part A is the placenta. Okay. Now let's go to B. Name the process by which substances move down a concentration gradient from the mother's blood to the embryo's blood. Okay, so we can say that concentration from the mother's blood, okay, from a higher concentration to a lower concentration. So we can say that diffusion. Diffusion. So the answer is between diffusion and osmosis, right? Diffusion and osmosis. The answer is between diffusion and osmosis. Does that make sense? Okay. Now let's continue. Let's go to 1.5. Okay, 1.5.1. Give the name of the part of the ear that performs each of the following functions. A. Directs sound waves to the auditory canal. Directs sound waves from the or to the auditory canal. Let me just see. Or to the auditory canal. So our answer is the pinna, right? So the pinna, this is the pinna. So it directs sound waves to the auditory canal. Let's go to B. Let's go to B. B. Converts sound stimulus into a nerve impulse. Sound stimulus into a nerve impulse. So our answer becomes what? The cochlea, right? Or the organ of Corti. That makes sense. Now let's go to C. Transmits vibrations from the tympanic membrane to the oval window. From the tympanic membrane to the oval window. So our answer is the ossicles, right? So the ossicles here, right? Which is our hammer, right? Anvil and stirrup. Now let's go to the next one. 1.5.2. A middle ear infection can result in the production of excess fluid. If part W becomes blocked, the fluid cannot drain naturally and build up of fluid and a buildup rather of fluid causes an increase in pressure in the middle ear, which may interfere with hearing. Identify part W. Let's go to part W. So part W is the Eustachian tube. Eustachian tube. Okay, now let's go to B. Give the name of the small tube that is surgically inserted into the tympanic membrane to drain the excess fluid and reduce pressure in the middle ear. So obviously that device is called grommets, right? Grommets. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, let's go to 1.6. Go to the questions. Give the letter name of the part that contains the highest concentration of cones. Right, okay, highest concentration of cones. Our answer here becomes C. C is the yellow spot, right? So C becomes our yellow spot. Okay, now let's go to B. Okay, is a transparent layer at the front of the eye that causes the refraction of light. For the fact that they say at the front of the eye, that can only be the cornea, right? So the cornea becomes G, right? The cornea becomes G. The cornea is transparent and it also helps in the refraction of light because it's it's convex, not biconvex. It's convex rather, right? Okay, C. Let's go to C. Prevents the reflection of light in the eye. So prevents the reflection of light in the eye. So our answer becomes B, the choroid rather, the choroid. Okay, because it contains a brown pigment that absorbs light. 1.612. Give the letters of the parts that will cause a change in the shape of part H during accommodation. Okay. Okay, now we're starting with E, obviously. E becomes our ciliary muscle. Right, then we go to I becomes our suspensory ligament. Then our last letter becomes what? H. H is the lens. So these are all the parts that are involved in accommodation. Accommodation, right? Remember, what is accommodation? Accommodation is the ability of the eye to alter the shape of the lens in order to focus on a close by or distant object. Does that make sense? So, yes. Okay, so H, already they gave us H here, so there's no need for us to include H, right? So we're just including I, which is our suspensory ligament, and E, which is our ciliary muscles. Okay, so we're done with section A. Oh, we're not done. Actually, we're left with 1.7. Okay, now let's go to 1.7. The flow diagram below shows, right? It shows the process of homeostasis in the human body on a hot day to balance the internal water level. Okay, so it's hot day, low intake of water, and a person is active. Right? So it's hot day, there's a low intake of water. So we know that when there's a hot day, there's low intake of water. What happens? Right? But let's just discuss what happens when it's a hot day and you're taking in less water into your blood or into your body. Okay, sorry about that. So it's a hot day. The receptors in the hypothalamus, remember, the receptors are called osmoreceptors, right? So the osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus, they're stimulated. They stimulate the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus will secrete what? Gland A, right? Or it will stimulate gland A rather, not secrete. It will stimulate gland A. What is gland A? Gland A is the pituitary gland. Remember, the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, they work hand in hand, right, during osmoregulation. So gland A will secrete hormone B. Hormone B becomes our antidiuretic hormone or ADH, right? It becomes our ADH. DH. So gland A becomes our ADH. Okay. Gland A, pituitary gland, hormone B is ADH. Sorry about that. Then ADH will go to target organ C. What is target organ C? Target organ C obviously is the kidney, right? The kidney. The kidney. No way that I can write this. Okay, it's the kidney. Okay, then water levels return to normal. I'll just go to the question. Name the homeostatic process represented by the flow diagram above, right? By the flow diagram above. Okay, so homeostatic process called what? Osmoregulation, right? Osmoregulation. So don't forget that. So let's go to 1.7.2. Give the name of gland A. So what's the name of gland A? Gland A becomes, we already discussed that. Gland A becomes our pituitary gland. Pituitary gland. Then give the name of hormone B. Hormone B becomes what? ADH. Give the name of target organ C. Target organ C becomes our kidney. Right, let's go to 1.7.3. Will the urine produced on a hot day be diluted or concentrated? Obviously, it's concentrated. Why? Because the body requires more water. So, more water will infiltrate into the blood or it will diffuse into the blood. Does that make sense? It will diffuse into the blood. Okay, not diluted, right? You only produce diluted urine when you are intaking water at higher rates, right? When you have a lot of water, right, in your body, or when you're drinking a lot of water, then you will produce diluted urine. The answer here is concentrated. Okay, so I think we're done with section A, right? So we'll park it here for today, and I'll see you on the next lesson where when we are discussing and answering higher order questions. Thank you so much.